What is SolrAI? SolrAI is a Drupal module designed to sync a Search API Solr index with a vector database store. In this case, we are using Weaviate as our vector store. We then use that vector store, also called an embedding, to provide context to queries we make to a large language model. In other words, artificial intelligence. As of this recording, SolrAI is using the OpenAI LLMs. In short, SolrAI provides a way for you to semantically search your Drupal content in addition to your existing keyword search functionality. What is semantic search versus keyword search? Drupal is a popular content management system that's often used to manage, organize, and facilitate searches through a variety of content like articles, blogs, and PDF files, and other media files. When it comes to searching, though, searching through this content, there are two common approaches: keyword search and semantic search. So keyword search is the traditional approach that has been used for a long time. It is based on looking for exact matches or close variants of the words that the user inputs as their search query. In our test database, we have a Drupal node titled Olivia Birthday Party. You can keyword search for this using the words Olivia and birthday. And the search would look for content that contains these exact words. The pros to this is it's simple and straightforward. For specific queries with unique terms, it can be quite effective. The cons to this is that it lacks an understanding of context or meaning. The node in question also mentions the time guests are scheduled to arrive, but doesn't use the word time, so a keyword search would not reveal this information. Several activities are also scheduled, but no way to keyword search for these unless you know the activities in advance. So, semantic search, right? Semantic search is a more sophisticated approach. It's based on understanding the meaning and context behind the words in the search query. Let's use the same example of Olivia's birthday party. A semantic search system would not only look for the exact words, but also understand that you are looking for information on the time or scheduled activities. You can ask, when is Olivia's birthday party? And when should people come? And what are the activities scheduled? Even though none of these keywords are present in the actual text. But because these are subjects addressed in the text, these searches will yield informational results. So the pros of this is that it's more intelligent and can provide more relevant results, especially for ambiguous queries. It understands synonyms, context, and sometimes even natural language questions. The cons is it's computationally more intensive, obviously more expensive with the cost of tokens, and can sometimes overcomplicate results by making assumptions about what the user is looking for. Also, it's actually very weak, amazingly, when it comes to recognizing keywords. So in summary, keyword search is like using a basic flashlight to find something based on a literal match, whereas semantic search is like using a smart light that adapts and changes based on the deeper meaning and context of what you're looking for. Through the use of OpenAI's large language models and embeddings, the SolrAI module provides the ability to implement semantic search on any Drupal site. What is fine-tuning versus embedding? If you have looked into this subject at all, that is the subject of large language models, artificial intelligence, and training these models, you have probably heard the terms fine-tuning and embeddings. SolrAI is an embedding tool. I'm not going to discuss the finer points of fine-tuning an LLM versus using embeddings. I will place a link to an excellent conversation on the topic. Suffice it to say that if your goal is to be able to use a large language model to provide answers to questions about your content, the most effective method for getting the best responses is to use embeddings. So I'm going to try to explain this whole chat completion process as best I can. If it's just too confusing, don't worry about it. But hopefully if you understand the process, then you'll understand how to make better questions, get better responses. So the process, of course, starts with, up here, basically a question, right? Is it the first question, right? Yes or no? If it's the first question, right, then we don't need any chat history. We go straight to what we call retrieving the embedding for the initial question. So you can see here, and by embedding, what happens is typically you would embed the question with an AI model, and then use that embedding of the question to match with the embedding of your Drupal content that's in the vector store. However, I use Weaviate, and Weaviate takes care of that process. When I was using Pinecone, it was a two-step process. So anyway, we're going to go on the Pinecone side here. So essentially, when you submit the question when you first submit the question for the chat completion, what we're going to do using Weaviate is we're going to take that question and we're going to extract from it a concept. In other words, sometimes the way we ask questions, it's like, you notice the way I talk, it could be kind of convoluted. So we basically ask the LLM to take that question and extract the core meaning, the core concept of that question. And then that is what we then submit to our vector store, right, in order to retrieve context documents. As you see here, SolrAI get context. What are context documents, you ask? Well, let's take our Olivia's birthday party example. When I want to ask questions about Olivia's birthday party, right, the large language model, it doesn't know anything about Olivia or her birthday party, so I have to send it information. So essentially what I will do is I will send it that node that we looked at with all the information about the party. That then becomes the context for whatever my questions are. So as you remember, I asked the question, when is the party? When should people arrive? Or the other question I asked, what are the activities, right? So this is all in the context, right, that we're going to send to the LLM along with our question. And so we retrieve, so that's what this step is. This step is to basically retrieve those context documents from our vector store, which happens to be Weaviate in this case, okay? We then take all that information and then we submit it to get what we call a chat completion. That is, now we take the question and we take the context documents, we send it to our large language model, and our large language model hopefully will give us the answer that we're looking for, which of course is here, right? Retrieve answers from OpenAI, which is what we're using now for our large language model. Okay, so you see the next step here is to add the question and answer to chat history. So in order to maintain a conversation with a large language model, we have to basically send it the entire conversation every time we ask a new question, because that's the only way it will know what the heck we're talking about. So what we do is if there is another question, right, and remember we just went through the first question, then we come all the way back up here, right, all the way back up here to this little box, okay? As you see here, so the next question, right, is no longer the first question, okay? So now what we do is we take this new question plus the chat history. What's the chat history? The chat history is the previous question in the previous response, okay? And so we take that, and now we want to generate what's called a standalone question. All right. So the standalone question is just that. That's, for example, if you begin talking to someone and you say, what time did they come? Right? Well, you know, the person, you know, that you're talking to, right, unless you told them before the context, right, they have no idea. So the same thing with large language model. So what we end up doing is we take the standalone question. We're going to generate a standalone question from the new question plus the chat history. So that gives us context. So for example, if we've already been conversating with the LLM and I say, what time should people arrive? Well, we need for the LLM to know, okay, the context that we're talking about. So we're talking about the birthday party, right? And we're talking about the time that the birthday party is supposed to start, okay? And so by sending all that information back along with the new question, what time should people come, the large language model now understands our conversation and can respond. So anyway, this step of the process is, you know, creating the standalone question. We then, again, we come back to getting the embedding, right? And as you know, Weave automatically creates the embedding for the new, for the questions. So we just come back over here. And now again, and this is optional, this new standalone question that we just created up here, right? We want to get the core concept for it, okay? Now, I have made this optional because sometimes this works really well, and then sometimes it works not so well. And so you will see on the prompt screen that there is an option for us to simply override this, to not, you know, get a concept and then just submit what our standalone question is. So anyway, we retrieve the standalone question concept or not, okay, and then we move on to the next step, which is to use the standalone question to submit to Weave along with the history in order, I'm sorry, not along with the history, to simply submit to Weave, right, our vector store, to get our context documents. You remember what our context documents are, right? Those are the documents which tell the large language model or provide it the information that we are asking a question about, okay? So, so we submit that standalone question to the vector store, and the vector store then looks at that and retrieves documents that it thinks are relevant to that question, okay? Then, for our chat completion, we submit the standalone question plus the relative documents, right? Let me bring that in here so you can see that. There we go. So we submit the standalone question and the relevant documents, okay, to get the chat completion from the LLM. By that, I mean the LLM is going to look at the questions, going to look at the documents, and then hopefully give you an answer. And hopefully it's a good answer, Okay, and we take that answer along with the standalone question and we add it to the chat history. And then if there's another question, we then repeat the process. So I know that's a bit rambling, but hopefully you get the general gist of it, and it will help you to understand what the process, what's going on behind the scenes when you enter a question into that query, the SolrAI query screen. Okay, so here is our query screen, and as you can see, there's two versions here. One is the admin version, and the second is the just the regular user version. And as you can see, it's mostly the same information in both, with the exception of a couple of items. So if we look at the admin screen, you see we have the option to turn the concepts on or off. We discussed that in the chat completion. Concepts are when you basically get the core concept of your question that you submitted in order to retrieve context documents. And sometimes this is great, and then sometimes it's not. You could play around with it and see what happens. As you see, this is available on every user screen. Now we also have something that we've not talked about before, which is called hybrid query. Essentially, the search prompt here is for semantic searching. It does basically a vector search for the context documents, what we call their embeddings. But when you do a vector search, basically you use something called cosine similarity to match your question vector to your content vectors. So what you could do here is, let's say that you're doing a search and you need it to be more keyword centric than semantic centric. Okay, well, that's what this little slider is for. So you can you can click on hybrid query, and then you have this little slider. So the more you want it to be keyword, the more you slide it towards 0, and the more you want it to be vector or semantic, you slide it more towards 1. Again, something you can play around with when you do searches to see if it gets you better results. And you can see all users have this capability. Next, we have include generated context summaries. This is an option. The administrator of a site may decide that they want to create summaries to attach to what we call chunks. What are chunks? Well, let's say you have a very large document. These large language models only have a limited context window. So in order for them to read very large documents, we have to chop them down into what we call chunks. So when you do a search, right, and you're searching for your context documents, you may come up with, a chunk, right, that matches, that's in the middle of the document. So when we are embedding these documents in our vector store, what we can do is we can attach a summary of the top document to every chunk or subdocument. So and I use the term subdocuments and chunk, they mean the same thing. Basically, you have one big document, you break it down into several subdocuments, which we call chunks. But in order to maintain a relationship, right, with the larger document, we have this option here for creating context summaries. Now, this is done at the time that the document is embedded, and that's the administrative choice. However, if the administrator does make the choice, you in doing your query, you can also make the choice of, when you're doing a search, whether you want to include that summary in the search or not. Again, something you play around with. It may work for you, it may not. But these are options which are here overall to give you a little bit more flexibility when it comes to getting back the information that you're looking for. And again, as you can see, all users have this capability. The next is include generated context questions. All right, again, this is an admin option which is implemented at the time that documents are embedded or vectorized. Again, embedded, vectorized, the way that I use the term, they mean the same thing. We have an option in SolrAI when you are embedding documents to just generate questions that those documents answer. We found sometimes in doing searches, both in the vector store and with LLMs, that sometimes providing questions in the documents that they answer helps, both of those entities to return better results based upon, the content of your text. This is totally optional, as you can see, but sometimes it can help you to get better results. But again, it only matters if the administrator of the site has decided that they are including context questions in the documents. So anyway, that site administrator will let you know, as post somewhere that this is what they're doing or not doing. But anyway, you have that option here, and of course that's a general option. All right, so the options which are not available to the general public, which are only admin options, are to turn moderation on and off. What moderation is the LLM basically enforcing alignment. You can't just say whatever you want to say, racial epithets, cursing, bad language, terrorist kinds of ideas, so forth. Anyway, all questions are moderated, and they go through the LLM, and the LLM will decide if it is a safe question or not, and if not, it obviously won't process it. Now, that, of course, the general public does not have that capability, but you as an administrator does, because we assume you as an administrator will not, you will stay aligned yourself, put it that way. All right, standalone question, on or off. So as you recall back in our little chart, the standalone question is designed to maintain the historical context of a conversation with a large language model. Typically, you always want that on. Otherwise, each question that you ask, if it's not answered completely in the context documents that are submitted, the model simply won't know the history of the conversation. They're just not designed to do that. There are cases where, as an administrator, you may just want to force the model to answer your question directly, and that's why you have this option to turn the standalone question on or off. So at the time of this recording, there are basically the two models we're using for chat completion. It's GPT 3.5 and GPT-4. Probably by the time most of you see this, we'll have GPT-5 out. But at any rate, GPT 3.5 is the least expensive and generally the standard. However, as an admin, you may want to test to see whether you get better results with GPT-4, and so you have that option here. You also have the option as administrator to set GPT-4 as the default model for the site. But again, you want to test that out because GPT-4 is several times more expensive, and depending on the types of documents you have and the amount of tokens that are being used, you may want to proceed with caution on whether you're going to allow GPT-4 for your general queries. And then there is a limit. Again, this is a configuration setting. So whatever the global configuration setting is, the limit is, that's what all the other your public users, or non-admin, I should say, users will be limited to. And this limit is, of course, the context documents, the number of context documents which can come back. So as you recall, in order to submit a chat completion, we have to send the question plus the context documents so that the LLM knows what the heck we're talking about and has the information it needs to answer the question. So as administrator, you can set this higher or lower in order to test what's best. But again, this is a site-wide setting, and whatever the default is, that's what all the other non-admin users will default to. And finally, here you see keyword search, which is available on both screens. This is a straight keyword search. So this is not using the vector store at all. This is actually going to search the documents as they are on the site. And but again, it's only limited to keyword searching. And the problem with this is that a lot of times you'll have documents that are very large documents, like 750 page PDFs, right? So if you do a keyword search, it will show you in the search results an extract where your keywords match. But when you click on the link, it's going to bring up that whole 750 page document, and now you've got to do a second keyword search in order to get to the place in the document that you're looking for. And of course, we alleviate all of that by doing semantic searches, which will bring you back essentially the answer to the question. Well, theoretically, will bring you back the answer to the question. So hopefully that sort of is an overall summary of what you see on your query screen when you begin to ask questions. In using SolrAI query, I believe the most important thing to remember is that for all the benefits of semantic search itself is not a replacement for keyword search. There is, and will always be, situations where we need to locate content based upon specific words. Keyword search is perfectly designed for this. Semantic search is not. I'll give you examples. Our test database consists of thousands of documents from various sources. We have DGA and WGA contracts, Hollywood news reports, school board policies and meeting agendas, California real estate rules and regulations, and of course, Olivia's birthday party. In all of this content, there are only 3 documents where the phrase Star Trek is mentioned. Here are screenshots of various failed attempts using SolrAI semantic search to locate those documents. Note the phraseology and settings used. Now, in the end, I was able to come up with the correct phrase and settings to retrieve the documents in question. I just wanted to show you this first to make sure you understand that you can't use a semantic search mechanism to do keyword searching. In semantic search, you are searching based upon ideas and concepts. In keyword search, you are searching for specific words. Just keep in mind, there is a difference. Okay, so since we mentioned Star Trek, let's ask the system, what do the documents have to say about Star Trek? Let's see what comes back. Ah, look at this. Interesting. So, you ask a question. What the SolrAI query system will do is, according to whatever limits you have, it will show you the documents that are retrieved from the vector store, right, and submitted to the large language model for an answer. So in this case, we asked, what do the documents have to say about Star Trek? This is then submitted to our vector store, which is, as you know, is Weaviate. And a cosine similarity vector search is done. In other words, this question is vectorized. It is then matched against all the vectors of all the content from this entire site that are in that vector store. And a calculation, which is called a cosine similarity, is done. And what happens is that the documents which are closest, or the vectors which are closest, which have the closest match, are the ones that are retrieved. And in this case, you can see these are the documents. Ellison Paramount settled lawsuit, Star Trek writer sues Paramount, and you see this appears to be duplicated. It's not. What's happened is that this was a large article, so it was chunked, so it has actually, there are two, I guess you call it, sub-articles, right, which were created from this one article. And then our Netflix deal, which is mentioned, I think Star Trek is mentioned in one sentence here. Now, you will note that in the failed examples that I gave you, I was looking for the term Star Trek, okay? Basically the keyword Star Trek. In this question, you will notice that what I'm asking is what documents mention, what documents talk about Star Trek. And you see that the one document that would not come up, right, in all of our keyword searches comes up as the appropriate third document here. So anyway, this is what you're seeing here. So for example, I could click on this, right, and it's going to take me to the full article. Okay, all right, and that's true for each one of these. Now you notice here that we have DGA, Directors Guild of America Agreement PDF. Now, this is like a, I don't know, 700 page PDF. Why would it come up, right, in this list about Star Trek when the term Star Trek does not appear in it? Well, because more than likely, now remember that we have a limitation of 5, right, that come within a certain distance of each other. So my guess is, and I'm, just based upon my experience working with AI, is that when we talk about Star Trek, right, we're talking about what? We're talking about a science fiction show, a science fiction television show. And of course, the DGA contract would talk about what? Television shows, maybe even specifically science fiction television shows. So, in our human brains, we're saying, wait a minute, that's a, large leap there. But remember, this is artificial intelligence. Everybody seems to forget the word artificial in the phrase, in the term artificial intelligence. So in the computer's mind, right, there is some similarity here. Now, one of the settings that we have in SolrAI is a distance setting. So when articles are just completely irrelevant, right, then they are cut off. But again, because we set a limit of 5, this still came obviously within the threshold. Okay, so anyway, I'm just mentioning that because when you do these types of searches, you may see, items come up in the list that like appear to be totally unrelated, and they probably are totally unrelated. So the first items that come up will always be the closest in terms of matching your search. Okay, so the next thing we see down here is the large language model attempts to explain or rather answer your question here, right, based upon the content it finds here. And in this case, let's see, based on the provided documents, the information about Star Trek includes the following. Harlan Ellison, a writer, sued CBS Paramount for alleged failure to pay him for the merchandising and other exploitations on the City on the Edge of Forever, an episode of the original Star Trek series that he wrote. And, it just goes on, I guess, explaining the lawsuit. It also here, as you see, summarizes that little line from the Netflix CBS deal article, where it says CBS Paramount earned millions. Netflix and CBS had a deal worth $200 million for non-exclusive rights to stream shows like Star Trek. Okay, and it even mentions context document 4, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. This one right here. And you note that it doesn't say anything about the DGA because it's, really sort of irrelevant. And again, you ask, well, why does that show up? Because when we tell the large language model to give us, our limit is 5, okay, then it's going to find 5. It's going to return 5, even if only 1, 2, 3, or 4 are relevant, at least semantically in terms of what we're looking for. All right. And finally down here, you can see that all of the standard settings are on. The concepts are on. You can see here by concept, what it did is it took this question, all right, and then it created this conceptual question, which is information about Star Trek, okay? And that is what was actually submitted to the vector store in order to retrieve these documents. Moderation is on, so we can't use any racial epithets or ask it to about performing criminal activities, so forth. Standalone question is on, and we'll see that in a second why that's useful. So all right, so I think it answered this question pretty good. So now let's ask a follow-up question. Let's just say, who won the lawsuit? Okay, now notice that I didn't mention Harlan Ellison, all right, or even the specific lawsuit against WGA, because it's in the conversation, right? And part of the chat history, and remember that's why I went through the whole thing about the chat completion process. It should recognize that we are talking about the lawsuit that it mentions here. So let's just submit that and see. And note again that I don't have to mention anybody's particular names. Now note that the standalone question comes back and says, who won the lawsuit regarding the alleged failure to pay for merchandising and exploitations of the City on the Edge of Forever? Right. So this, again, is a standalone question. It gives to the LLM so that it can review the documents that come up and then answer that. based on provided based on the provided context documents. Harlan Ellison won the lawsuit regarding the alleged failure to pay the merchandising and exploitations on the City on the Edge of Forever. Let's ask it something. Let's say, when did that air? Now again, notice I didn't mention the City on the Edge of Forever. I just, because that's mentioned in the article. So it should know contextually, if I ask when did that air, I'm talking about this, the episode of Star Trek. And as you can see here, fortunately that information was in the documents, and you can see the City on the Edge of Forever episode of the original Star Trek series first aired in April 1967. Now let's switch reels a little. Let's see if we can ask it about that deal. Let's see, what can I ask it about that Netflix deal? How much was the deal worth? That's all I can think of right now. I didn't totally read that article, but it should jump back to the Netflix CBS deal. So let's see. Yeah, it does. So you see here, how much was the deal worth? The standalone question then becomes, how much was the deal between Netflix and CBS Paramount for non-exclusive rights to stream shows like Star Trek worth? And as you can see, based on the information provided in the context, the deal in the context document, the deal between Netflix and CBS Paramount for non-exclusive rights to stream shows like Star Trek was worth $200 million, which of course is in the title. But I hope that what you see here, and that's why I showed you what didn't work before as well, what to show you what does work. And what does work is the ability to, number one, search for content based upon, concepts, ideas, what is discussed, in the documents. So that's the first, I think, advantage. And the second advantage to this is you can conversate. You can have a almost human-like conversation with, the documents that you have stored on your site. So anyway, this is sort of just a brief summary of what you can do. I suggest you just start playing around with it and, seeing what comes back. As you are learning this, it's always good to start with information that already exists. That way you can get a feel for how you should phrase, your questions. And, sometimes this is hit and miss. Remember, artificial intelligence, these are computers, these are machines. They do make mistakes. But if you understand what the rules are, what it's looking for, why it's looking for it in that way, what these options here, how it changes, the way it looks for information, I think eventually you'll be able to come up with a way of executing queries that will, in most cases, get you exactly what you're looking for.